The mystery of Lance Stroll's sudden and serious Spanish Grand Prix injury. John, we've got you here to try and solve that mystery, if you can. So basically, the guy does qualifying, gets knocked out in Q2, disappears suddenly, pulls out of the race entirely, and now is an injury doubt for his home race in Canada. There's been all sorts of what Aston Martin calls paddock gossip since he departed the paddock suddenly. So can you just first explain the chain of events here?
Yeah, this is quite a weird one because there's been no hint of any issue with Lance Stroll at all over the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. We've seen him come out of Q2, we saw him go to the media pen, everything was fine, and then there was a note from the FIA saying he'd missed his driver weighing procedure after qualifying, which is what drivers have to do. Mandatory, you come after qualifying, if you get knocked out, to the garage, then you have to go straight to the FIA weigh bridge to get weighed, just to make sure that the car's in compliance, don't stop. Lance had missed that. We didn't think much of it until Saturday night. We get a note from Aston Martin saying Stroll has withdrawn from the Spanish Grand Prix because of a wrist injury, which seemed quite strange. So this was a story, a lot of unanswered questions at that point. Develops overnight, and then we get back in the next morning. Then obviously the paddock rumour mill is in overdrive. There'd been talk that Stroll had thrown a tantrum in there, been very kind of upset after Q2. There'd been an incident in the garage. He'd stormed out the back of the pits. That's why I'd missed the weighbridge. And it kind of then developed from there. Then there was a steward's hearing into why he'd missed the weighbridge. And then a few more details came out. He had gone out the back of the garage. He'd done the media pen. He'd gone to the medical centre. The medical centre had looked at his wrist, that he'd been complaining of pain, and advised him to, don't race on, go and get it sorted. And then he left the track from there. But there was still this little bit of this mystery about, what happened in the garage and were these events connected or not.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because normally you'd expect if somebody suddenly got hurt that they'd go straight to the medical centre and there'd be sort of constant communication about their situation. Although I suppose it's not the typical Formula One incident in terms of somebody having an obvious incident on track and then you're kind of checking to see if they're okay, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think what makes kind of has added to the mystery element is that there'd been no mention of this outside of the team at all. We'd had no indication. Lance had this bike accident ahead of the 23 season. I think it was 12 days from this bike crash where he broke his wrists, had an operation, came back, brilliant performance in Bahrain. And then the issue had pretty much gone away. We'd had no reference. There had been no mention at all in the media. He did the media pen on Saturday. No mention at all of a problem there. So I think this is probably why there's this slight disconnect, because you hear drivers all the time complaining about, Fernando Alonso, for example, talked about his back pain he suffered in the car in the past and why he was racing on for the mechanics. He's talked about these things in the media pen, and we've seen him in the media pen, holding his back after races and saying, I need a break. These cars are tough. This season's tough. So I think this is partly where the issue has come from, is that there's this disconnect between what we've been told and the indications and what potentially has been going on behind the scenes and behind those closed garage doors.
Yeah, it's quite common for drivers to kind of carry minor ailments with them, isn't it? Like you say, Alonso's back. I mean, other drivers have complained of back pain, particularly in this generation of cars. We'll come back to the injury itself later, but let's focus a bit on what happened exactly in the garage, because there is this version of events that obviously Aston describes as the paddock gossip we mentioned earlier. It's gained a lot of attraction, though, saying Stroll basically lost his temper after getting dumped out in Q2. He had quite a good run in Q1. He was 7th fastest ahead of Alonso, but then dumped out in 14th. Didn't go quicker in Q2 than he did in Q1 either. Apparently he criticised team members, potentially injured his hand or aggravated the pre-existing problem by whacking something in the garage. You obviously spoke to the team. You were there in Barcelona. Is there any truth to that rumour?
I think that, there's an extreme story version that went around that Stroll came out of the car, was hugely upset, threw his toys out the pram, abused the team members, smashed some things up, hurt his wrist and stormed off and flew out to Geneva. I don't think the reality is as extreme as that. I think it is true to say he wasn't happy after getting knocked out in Q2. I think, as any driver who is upset, will vent some frustrations with team members. I spoke to an Aston Martin spokesperson on Sunday who said, Lance was upset. They don't deny he was upset about getting knocked out in Q2 and the frustrations, because I think he felt there was more in this car. But they do emphasise that, this being upset incident wasn't linked to the wrist injury. These things are completely separate. There was no punching of items in the garage, no punching of a wall that aggravated the wrist injury. I think the wrist injury and the events are separate, but they have happened at the same time. And I think it's the classic paddock whispers where stuff shuffles down the pit lane from garage to garage and mechanic to mechanic. These things can get embellished. But I think it is true to say he was upset. He was frustrated. There were some words had, but I don't think you can say that this upset, him being upset, was the trigger for him storming off and leaving the circuit.
Time is running out to get 75% off a membership with us with our latest special offer on Patreon. It's a great time to check out the Race Members Club, including bonus podcasts and videos, exclusive behind-the-scenes insights, the chance to ask questions for our shows, community groups where you can chat with us and like-minded fans, and you get all of our regular podcasts and YouTube videos ad-free. This special promotion ends on June the 4th, so hurry if you want to become the ultimate insider. Just head to Patreon via the link we've posted below and enter the code RACE75 at checkout to claim this limited time offer. What do we know about the injury then? Because we know he originally injured his hand and wrist in a cycling crash back in 2023. You mentioned, he missed pre-season testing and then he kind of rushed himself back for the first race because Aston had a really competitive car for the start of that season, and there were lots of videos online of Lance doing his kind of physio to recover. And yeah, he carried the effects of that for the first few races, but it wasn't an ongoing story throughout the season, and there's been kind of no mention of it at all by him or anyone really until now. So we get the team kind of saying, well, actually he's been having pain for the last 6 or so weeks, so basically the run of races from Jeddah through to Spain. So presumably something happened in Barcelona to aggravate it. The team say it wasn't an incident of him, punching something, which we know drivers do. I mean, there's a famous story of Lewis Hamilton smashing a team door, isn't there, after colliding with Nico Rosberg at the same race in 2016. But also it wasn't clear that the normal action of driving had hurt him in some way. You'd expect on a bumpy track with lots of curves, maybe Imola or Monaco, that might happen. But Barcelona is kind of, okay, it's a physical circuit from G-forces, but not from kind of the bumps and jarring that you'd get wrist injuries from. So you've spoken to him several times through this run of races as well. Have you noticed any problem that he's been carrying? What do you make of this kind of timeline we've been given?
No, he's not mentioned it at all, but I think Stroll's also somebody who very much keeps his kind of personal life and what's going on behind the scenes very secret. When I go to media sessions, and I've seen this throughout all his time in Formula One, ask him anything about detailed question about racing or cars or the weekend is absolutely fine. But any hint of a question about his personal life, so if a journalist comes in and asks him where he's staying or what he's been up to or anything, he completely shuts down, and it will kill the entire media session because he just, his barriers come down and he stops talking about it. So he has been someone who keeps these things very personal to himself. So it's not necessarily unusual that he does it. Maybe he's a driver who thinks if I start talking about the wrist injury, people are going to probe it more. It'll be used as a excuse to kind of beat me down or as to why the performances aren't there. So he hasn't mentioned anything. I'm no medical expert, but perhaps it's a cumulative thing from this run of races. It's been, I think, one of the most intense starts to a season we've had. And while there hasn't been one, a big crash that's exacerbated it, if something starts niggling away at one of those early season races, you've had the triple header of Japan, Saudi, Bahrain, break, Miami, and then we've just had another triple header. Remember, these cars now are producing more downforce than they've done for a while. The cornering forces are greater. Super sticky tyres. So you're being pushed potentially harder than ever. Barcelona last time was quite hot, so very grippy conditions as well. Very, very tough. So I think maybe it's just a cumulative thing, and if the pain's getting worse and worse and worse, there's no respite basically. But it is just slightly strange as to why the medical advice would be on Saturday not to do it, and this hadn't come up on Thursday or Friday or even following the previous race in Monaco.
Yeah, maybe it was one of those situations where they were just hoping to get away with it until a bigger gap, and then go and have the procedure quietly without interrupting the racing schedule. But obviously it got to a point where he needed to suddenly stop. He missed the race, and he has, as we understand while recording this video, now had the procedure. So the injury is certainly genuine, and it seems he's gone back to the same medical team that operated on him originally in 2023, either to kind of correct things that weren't able to be done well enough at the time, or the new damage he's done over this run of races. You've spoken to the team, I believe. Do you know anything about the recovery plan from here? Because obviously the turnaround from Spain to Canada is quite tight. It's another kind of 2 weeks or less period, which is exactly the same time frame he went through back in 2023.
Yeah, there's no firm details we've got of this procedure. We don't know what the procedure was. We know it was done by the same team that operated on him in 23. So it's Javier Mir, who's a doctor he's got a clinic in Barcelona, very famous for hand and wrist injuries, deals with a lot of MotoGP people, so understands motorsport injuries, understands wrists and hands, and has been very, very well trusted by those. This is why Stroll stayed in Barcelona after leaving the track on Saturday. The procedure's been done, and he gets a good run now. And I think the fact in 23, if he came back 12 days after actually the accident and the injuries being much more serious, then the likelihood is it's still possible he could be back for Canada. I think we need to wait for the more details of what the procedure was. Was it just a tidying up? Was it any did any bones need sorting out? Is it just the muscles? Is it just a muscle thing? Is it some realignment? I think until we get those details, I don't think we can say for definite whether he's easily coming back or he is a proper doubt.
And that's obviously what puts his participation in his home race, Canada, into question. Obviously, Aston Martin have said their plan A is for, and they've said this all along, even before the procedure happened, that their plan A is for Stroll to race in Canada. So presumably they were expecting whatever procedure to not be too onerous. But at the same time, obviously, they do need a plan B if it was more serious than they expected or there were complications, etc. So what are Aston Martin's options if Stroll can't race in Canada?
Yeah, well, they've got two reserve drivers, Felipe Drugovich and Stoffel van Dorn. The complication of Canada is it's Le Mans, and both are racing scheduled to race in Le Mans that weekend. Van Dorn in at Peugeot and Drugovich in at Cadillac.
That's unfortunate.
Yes, bad timing.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the uncertainty about Stroll's wrist, even if the doctors say yes, it's totally fine, I think they will need a fallback option. From what we understand, Drugovich is potentially top of the list as the reserve, and
well, he's put enough hours in, hasn't he?
Yes.
I mean,
finally waiting.
Yeah.
So I think they may well feel it better to have him as a fallback option just in case Lance has any problems in Friday, because you can replace the driver all the way up to after FP3 on Saturday morning. Second the driver has not qualified or driven any laps before qualifying, they can't do it. So
this is why they couldn't replace Stroll in Spain, right?
Yeah.
Because he started qualifying.
So it gives them some leeway timing-wise. But for that to happen, I think they will need... It's a Le Mans test day this Sunday, so this is where Drugovich currently scheduled to do Le Mans. So I think things will nudge on that front. But the other option that Aston Martin could have is they could call upon Mercedes reserve Valtteri Bottas, for example. Bottas travels to the races, has this kind of roving role, so can be called upon by McLaren or even Williams potentially, or Aston Martin. So he could be another option if Drugovich decides that he's going to push on with Le Mans and it's all looking okay for Stroll. So there are options. I don't think we'll get to a scenario where Lance drives on Friday morning, says my wrist is hurting, can't carry on, and then they're left with nobody. So they will have a plan. There will be a plan B and a plan C in place. But at the moment, I think they're very much focused on Lance gets his wrist sorted and can return.